I run a data visualization studio in Berkeley, California, and we have been in Berkeley for about 2 years. Before that, we were in Madison, Wisconsin for about 8. Before I started Pitch Interactive, I worked for a company in Madison called Planet Propaganda. I know that people in Madison know that company. It was not the happiest time for me, but it was good. I actually learned a lot. I respect a lot of people at Planet, and what I learned was that there are times when you need to persuade, and there are times when you need to inform. And my background, my personal background, is that I have a degree in international economics and information systems from where I grew up in Arkansas. And actually a very good program because it was funded by like Walmart. And at that time they were like doing RFID way before anyone else was. So long story short, I've been interested in data for a very long time. I've been interested in connections around the world. One thing while I was studying that got me interested in data is I took a macroeconomics course, and the professor walked into the classroom, and before saying anything else, he said, what is the connection, like for the CIA, what's the main indicator that they use to predict the amount of heroin that's going to be in New York next year? And we were talking about it in class, and we had no idea. We were like freshmen or juniors or something, I don't remember. But I was thinking, like, by the intel that you get from apprehending convicts today. And he's like, no, like not at all. The indicator for that is the price of bread in Afghanistan. It's like, how can you use the price of bread in Afghanistan to predict the amount of heroin that's going to be in New York next year? And when you hear the answer, it's very simple. Afghanistan controls 92% of the world's opiates. In Afghanistan, it's a bare country. They pretty much produce wheat and opium. Everything else, they have nuts and berries and stuff like that, but that's like 2% of their productivity. Everything else is either wheat or opium. So if I'm a farmer and I have a particular amount of land, a specific amount of land, and I tell myself, am I going to grow wheat or poppy seeds for heroin? And basically it's a very simple figure in economics called supply and demand. It's called price equilibrium. Where is the price met? And the price is met where supply equals demand, where we know we need something, but how much of it is there? And if there's less of it than we need, the price is going to go up. So we know if in Afghanistan, if the price of bread goes up, that the amount of heroin in New York next year is probably also going to go up. And it fascinated me. It drew me in that. And I didn't know what else to do with myself. So I just kind of focused my life sort of on data. And I had no idea how to do it because at that time, this was like 1995, there was no data visualization. There were people who did data-driven art with computers, or not even data-driven art, it was computer-driven art from the 60s, but the connections weren't made between data and computers yet. The whole story with Pitch Interactive right now is like when we were in Madison, Wisconsin, we had some good clients. I mean, our clients were like Scientific American, Wired Magazine, Esquire. Most of them were based on either coast. At that time, actually, for a while, I was like, I'm not working with California clients because they never paid on time. They were way too chill for me. Like, oh my God, like these guys are so chill that like the New Yorkers were like, they were on the dollar every time, like really like working hard. We didn't have too many local clients in Madison because there's something about the Wisconsin culture that I love and that I get frustrated with. And the frustration part is that I'm from the South. Like I grew up in Arkansas, like I said, and we like confrontation in Arkansas. And Wisconsin, they don't like it. And so it's like everything's like, oh, that's nice. You're trying to avoid it. And so I had to avoid it, and client meeting, they just didn't go very well. And New Yorkers, they love that confrontation. And it's like, man, you're from this, wow, like you really are from the South. So our current clients right now, though, like when we moved out to Berkeley, it just changed the entire dynamic. Like our clients, like we're literally working actively on projects for Facebook, for Google, for eBay, for GE, for University of California, Davis, and somebody else who's a really big name, but I totally forgot right now. But it's like that's the situation. Like I have these 2 badges, one for Facebook and Google, where I can get into any Google facility anywhere in the world or any Facebook facility. It's kind of weird because Nick, he's a total Scotty. Like his parents are totally from Madison, and he says bag still all the time and everything. he loves Wisconsin. Like he had an adjustment problem. Like we went and drank a lot of beer just to like help him adjust to California. But it's weird because we kind of make jokes that sometimes we go and we have breakfast at Facebook and lunch at Google, and it's weird. I'm very thankful for it. It's nothing I take for granted. It's a weird, like, surreal situation, and we just sort of absorb it because we're doing something that not many people do. Data visualization is not an easy thing to do. It's tricky. There's a reason why there's only 4 really known data visualization studios in this country, because it's so multidisciplinary. There's so many things we don't have, where we don't have any idea of like what we're doing, or we're just kind of playing around, and we have our own techniques and methodologies and whatnot. So I want to go back. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit with this talk, but before I get into that even, I want to go back in time a little bit. This was, I believe, 1948. This was a letter that Henry Norris Russell wrote to Scientific American. Don't read it. I'll read it to you. This was a time when Scientific American just started producing graphics for their literature. Before that, it was just text only. Imagine time. And anyways, this guy wrote Sirs, all right, totally different time. I have read the new Scientific American from cover to cover and congratulate you most heartily upon it. The articles are on a high level, reached elsewhere, I think, only by the English magazine Endeavor. I have no idea what Endeavor is, but it's okay. Keep this up and you will fill a badly needed place in this country. The only minor criticism that I have is that some of the illustrations in Professor Whipple's paper are a bit modernistic, all right? This is like what he showed. This was like the modernistic stuff. I was like, dude, if you saw this, like, I have no idea what you would think of this. This is a piece that we did for Wired Magazine in 2012, visualizing 24 hours of 311 calls in New York. And so this piece that we did for Wired Magazine, which we did in like 5 days, it was like cutthroat sort of time schedule. They gave us about 35,000 rows of data and of 2 weeks of people calling 311. So if you don't know 311, it's like 911 you call like if your house is burning down, but if like someone's parked in your driveway or a tree fell over or like a rat is like humping a dog or I don't know what, you call 311, all right? It's a complaint. Like it bothers you. You have to get it taken care of. And so this was New York, so this was noise, and this was the actual original piece that we sent them. The interesting thing about this piece, and the only reason why I'm showing it, it's old, but it got a lot of publicity. It sort of put our name on the map in many ways. This was in the MoMA. It was in one of their exhibits with 2 other pieces of ours. The United Nations used it for their work, for a lot of their presentations. Tim O'Reilly used it without permission. That's cool, whatever, Tim O'Reilly, you can totally do that. But it was a way of showing the sort of multi-dimensional data, and it's using a technique called a stream graph. And so what we have is it starts at midnight, it ends at midnight. You have multi-dimensionality here, so you have volume. So you can see when New York is sleeping. And then you can see when New York wakes up. And then you have all these peaks and troughs. And we're using the top 25 most common complaints that people were calling about. And so you can see noise is the big one, I mean, that's New York. That's what you expect in New York. But then you have other things that actually pose questions like streetlight condition. Why the hell would somebody call about streetlight conditions in the middle of the day? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I just have the data. It could be that the streetlights are on and people were bothered by that. They felt like it was a waste of energy. That's an assumption. I don't know the answer, but that's exactly why you do data visualization, is you find questions that you want to answer. And that's the purpose of data visualization in many ways. Fast forwarding that to like last year, or about 1.5 years ago, we got into a project that was like a personal project. And I'm showing this because this is actually what most of our work looks like most of the time. But every 1.5 years or so, we kind of push client work away and we work on something personal for us. Under the sort of philosophy that the more work you do for yourself, the more people will recognize you for that work and the more they will pay you to do that kind of work. I think it's a really good philosophy and it's something that we try to keep. So there was a paper by Stanford and NYU that came out about drone strikes and their impacts on civilians in Pakistan. It was a fascinating paper. And basically what it showed, what it revealed was that drone strikes suck in Pakistan. They're terrible for the local population on many levels, also for a US security level, in the sense that the Taliban's #1 recruiting tool right now in Pakistan is drone strikes. Right now in Yemen and Somalia, drone strikes. Up until this point, when I read this paper, I was pretty neutral about the drone strike topic. I had no idea what I thought about it. I'm like, computers, accuracy, OpenCV, like technology, going out and killing terrorists like one at a time, that's a great fucking idea. Like, I like that idea. And then when I started looking at the data, I was like, whoa, like this is not at all what I thought. I mean, I'm the guy who like cried when Obama was like inaugurated. I was in Madison, so I was one of those dudes like, you know, Scott Walker, go down. You know, I was like, I didn't have a choice. Like that was like on my bike ride to work every day and home. Like there was a Scott Walker protest at the Capitol. I had to join that. And I got into it. I brought my daughter there. You know, it was like, you know, bad guy. And so I consider myself fairly liberal in many ways. But when I started seeing this data, it made me really question even my own political views. Like I'm like, okay, I was totally for this Obama guy. And like, holy shit. And I'll show you why. So we took all this data, and I'll explain it a little bit. This peak right here is when there was flooding in Pakistan, too. That's another sort of interesting sort of element that we find out with this. This is data visualization, and some people call this data dramatization. And I agree, it is. We're dramatizing data in many ways. We're telling a narrative. In order to tell a narrative in a way that people understand it and relate to it, you have to dramatize it. If you don't, it's bar charts. Use Excel. But you're not telling that story. The drone strike data that we had seen up until this point was pretty bare. You know, New York Times did a piece. Some other people did like geographic data. I'm like, nobody knows where Waristan is. You know, this is a northern part of Pakistan. It's like the Wild West. Nobody knows or cares where in the fuck that place is in the world. And I'm being very honest about that. But when you actually show the data, and as far as something that we can relate to, and that's casualties. So one thing I'll just show really quick with this piece, is that once it plays out, so here's what we did with the data, is, as I said, the data looked like this when we got it. I contacted Stanford, and there are people who wrote this paper that I read, and I said, I'd really like a data set that's verifiable. That's something that has credentials to it. He said, absolutely. There's a group in London called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. They will have your data set for you. They have the most legitimate data set that you can get. Legitimizing data is super important. As far as like ComScore data, like don't even use that crap. I mean, they sell that ComScore data for like hundreds and thousands of dollars, and it's bogus. I mean, I've worked with that so many times with ad agencies. I'm like, what the hell is this? You know, like people's behaviors on websites like that. There's no story behind that. Anyways, I'm not going to go there yet. If there are questions later, I'd love to answer. Give me another mojito, and oh my God, tonight it's going to be like ComScore data. So at any rate, when we went through this data set, we did not just use the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. And they're not necessarily considered a left-wing, like totally liberal. They were trying to be as objective as possible. When a drone strike happens, what happens is all these journalists go to the ground and they investigate. They ask people who died, how did this happen? And so what they would do is they would ask multiple sources, Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, local independent people, Reuters, anyone they can get, and they put all that data together and then they put it in a spreadsheet. And that's the data that they provided to us. It's a lot of work. Do we have that data for Afghanistan? No. Why? Because no journalist is brave enough to actually investigate this data in Afghanistan. It is such a dangerous country that journalists at this time, throughout this entire period, were like, dude, I know if I go there, I'm going to die. I'll last maybe 3 days before somebody kills me. And in Pakistan, it's actually, you know, like people know the region. The interesting thing with northern Pakistan is they still have colonial laws that were written from like British colonial era, which basically says that northern Pakistan, it strips people of like human rights. It's crazy how it works. And that's a big reason why there are a lot of drone strikes there. The other interesting thing, and I'm not going to dig into drones so much, but it was a very touching topic to learn more and more about this. When we went and got Osama bin Laden, we were like, yes, you know, and Pakistan was like, what? You know, like, how can you send people in from outside? Like, you just hurt our ego, and like, we could have gotten them or whatever. We got bin Laden. We needed to get them ourselves. That's understandable. The deal with drones is we fly them from Pakistani air bases. We give Pakistan the drones when we're done. And they take those drones and they take them over to Kashmir and they do their shit there. It's nuts. And the way it bothered me, I was like, wow, like, I really love my country and I want my kids to have a safe future, and this isn't really a safe way to build a future for my kids. It's disturbing. That's not the story I was focusing on. I was just focusing on the actual data. This was the data that really disturbed me. Was like, this was children, the bright red. The darker red was civilians, which civilians is basically elderly and women. This whole gray zone is called other. And the Obama administration calls that military combatants, or potential military combatants. Legally, it's any male between the ages of 14 and 40. That's it. The white, we went into a very conservative database called like the National Liberation Front for Drones, We Love You kind of thing. Because I wanted to say, like, okay, name me the actual threats to my country. Name those to me and I'll support this. And they're like, okay, we'll name them. We had 27 out of, and this was like, this is not even done. But in the end, it was like we had about 50 names out of about 3,200 victims. And then when we started looking at victim stories, it was like grandmother with 2 grandchildren in a farm, and they were droned. And it was like, wow. And, you know, I mean, and there's a reason why our drone stuff stops at 2013. Because in 2014, only last week was the very first drone strike this year in Pakistan. There was so much pressure on the Obama administration because data like this was actually revealed. When we launched this the first week, I like literally had a nervous breakdown. I had no idea. We were not ready. Like, we just pushed it out. And what happened was the Guardian picked it up in England. The Economist picked it up. The Huffington Post wanted me to like do a YouTube interview kind of thing. Breaking the Box or Breaking the Set, which is another like YouTube news network. And then I can even see through stats, like we got emails from like Pakistani news organizations, Iranian news organizations, German, Swedish. We're in Berkeley, so people are like knocking on our door. It was too much. I didn't have a press kit or anything. And I wasn't ready for it. But I was so glad that we did it at the same time. I don't smoke, and that was the day I smoked a pack of cigarettes and like freaked out. So that's like the personal side of it, but then there's the work side too. You know, like what does our client work look like, and what is that process? And I want to try to sort of bring some of that into place here. This was a piece that we did very recently for Popular Science. I get Scientific American Popular Science mixed up because they're very similar, but this was for PopSci. And this was actually data from Michael Mann, which he's like the man with CO2 data. Like, it was weird, like once this got published, he kept emailing me. And every time I'd respond to his email, I'd get an autoresponder like, hi, I'm under like extreme volume of emails right now. I may not respond to your emails. But Michael Mann is the guy who did the research for all the CO2 emission data over time. Like we saw Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. Most of that data was collected by this guy. And so Popular Science, they did this and they gave us a data set, and this was like the final piece that was actually published. But I wanted to give insight into some of our process. This is one of the actual very early diagrams that we did for this piece. So we got from here to here. And one of the other places that I wanted to get to was here, because I like the whole idea of horizon and like going up like red zone. But PopSci, they really liked the black. And I was like, that's fine. You know, I like it too. We do a lot of black backgrounds, but I wanted to do something different for once. But the whole story with this is there was this like faux pas. There was this moment over the last several years where it looked like the CO2 emissions were not going up anymore. And all people like naysayers of global warming were like, yes, we told you, you hippies were all wrong, and screw you, you don't know what you're talking about, even though they had no scientific evidence to back them up. And basically Michael Mann came out and said, no, that's totally like you have that all over the place. And these are the predictive analytics of where global warming is going, and it's really scary and dangerous, and we need to deal with that. We're not taking any sides here, though. I want to be clear that, like, I have my own personal opinions, and you're going to hear that because I'm not afraid to share my personal opinions. Dan and Dave, you guys know that way too well. But at the same time, our work, I really try to be as objective as possible. I don't try to take a side. However, we're all humans. You have to be. At some point, there's a very thin line between like what you want to be as an objective person and as a subjective person. And I think for business analytics, it's a very different mindset, because I know there are some people in here who do business analytics, and it's really important for business analytics in the sense of making quick decisions and like, what's our revenue? Okay, let's make a decision, let's go. But the work that we do at Pitch is more, we're trying to tell stories so that you remember what we're talking about. So that when you go back to that bar, or you go to a party, or you're talking with some people, that you can retell the story of like, basically the story here that I want you to tell when you see this is like, dude, people thought we were like okay, but no, we were like totally screwed. That's all I'm trying to tell you with this. Like, that's my goal. But we do a lot of other work too. We do art. We do a lot of different kinds of work. So I also co-organize an event called I.O., and I recognize somebody here from I.O. Hi. Was anyone else here at I.O. this year? I know there's another dude here from I.O. before. There, yes. There are two people from I.O. So I.O. is like, it's in Minneapolis. I was there last week, so I love the Midwest so much. I come here like 2 times within like a 10-day period. It's great. But I.O. it's a really great event, and I co-organize it with 2 other friends. I'm not promoting it because I don't need to. Our tickets sold out in 20 seconds this year. We had 700 and poof, the Magic Dragon. And so it's a really great, it's a data arts event. I mean, it's basically anyone interested in like arts and technology, they go there, and we really focus hard on a speaker lineup, multi-diversity, and inspiring people. But this year I went out and I asked survey questions from all the attendees and speakers. And those questions were like, where were you born when? When was your first kiss? Why would I ask that? Because that's a date in our history, in our lives, where we're very likely to remember that. That's the whole thing about cognition, is when there's an event that happens in our lives that is important enough, and there are several that is important enough for all of us, we will remember those. What's the first birthday you remember? Where were you during 9/11? Everyone in this room, I can comfortably say that we all know where we were during 9/11. I think it would be hard to find somebody today who does not remember. Maybe in 10 years, it will be hard to find people again, but I think that's the way your brain works. Your brain builds stories and it makes connections. I could ask you what you had for breakfast last Tuesday, and most of us will not remember, unless that breakfast was with Obama or somebody important. Then you will remember that. And it's those connections that you make, those tell the stories. So I was asking sort of these important questions. I was curious, what does our community look like? And so we went down into it, and we only had this square poster for the map. And we use this very specific mapping projection called a stereographic map. And we started mapping like the circles, the white circles are like where people were born. It's somewhat of a global community. The cool thing, because it's a square, and this is something I always want to stress, is that I think I even learned this at Planet. There was this guy, Dana, who I liked and I hated at the same time. But he was like, oh, the median's, the message is the message, not the median is the message. And I was like, I disagree. I think the median is the message in many ways. You got to work with the median to communicate that message. And he might not have meant what he said in that regard. Maybe I didn't understand him. I was young, naive, arrogant. I was a lot of things. But at any rate, we have a square poster. And how do you make a square poster interactive? You make it so that each side, you can turn it so there's no right side up. So one side of the poster, we took the birth, and you can't see that so well here. But you can see like one of our speakers was like 80 years old or something. And then the first kiss. Something very intimate, I think, and that's really important. When were we born, and when was our first kiss? And I think that's really, it's touching. It really touches in a certain way. You turn it over to the side. Okay, there's I.O. It's in Minneapolis. Your current location, where you flew to I.O. from. What's your distance, and what's your birth location? Like, again, something intimate. And where are you now? What are things we can relate to as humans? And so you can see this, like these are like basically North America, and you have these gaps, and these are like the oceans, You've got some weird ones, like some guy was born like in the Cayman Islands. Notice I can stretch my arm now. 3 weeks ago, I was like, oh, notice this. Like, it was really bad. This was hell. I will say that between like when I emailed you and like I can't make it out, and today, like, this is so much progress. And I'm not addicted to like oxycodone or anything like that. Right, yeah, no, yeah, I'm just on Tylenol now, so that's good. But it's interesting because you have these stories within the data sets that you don't even expect until you see them. And I think that's part of the interesting part of data visualization. 9/11, so there's this dot that goes up to New York. And what's your distance from New York when 9/11 happened? You know, where were people? We all pretty much remember where we were. I remember where I was. And I can't think of anyone. Maybe I should start asking people. But I'm just assuming that we all pretty much remember where we were. The last side of this is like, okay, let's give the stats, you know. Your first birthday, how old were you when you had your first birthday? What's the average years of everyone at IO that remembers their first birthday, their first kiss? It's 14 years old. That's interesting. Your average distance from IO, like where you live right now, but also where you were born. You know, these are numbers, and they mean something. You know, it's actually really interesting, and that's what I do, and that's what I love. Okay, so some tricks. I'm still going to show you work, don't worry, but I wanted to talk a little bit about meaningful stuff, like how do I get into data visualization? I know of 4 studios in this country, and I mentioned that before. There's Stamen in San Francisco. They're friendly with us. Periscopic in Portland. They're kind of friendly. We're getting more competitive because we took a bunch of work out from under them recently, but oops. Because last year we were 2 people, and now we're 6. And so we're moving into Oakland, and we could grow much bigger, but I just don't want to be very big at all. There's also Fathom in Boston, run by Ben Fry. I love Ben. He's one of the creators of processing. I try not to tread on their turf because they're amazing. But it's great because there's us, between the 4 of us, like, there's a lot of respect, like we communicate with each other still. I mean, and there are some emerging people, but I don't see that many people coming out doing data visualization unless they're individuals. I don't see studios coming out and doing that. And people are always asking, well, where the hell do I start? I'm a creative or I'm an engineer. And it's both, you know, where do I go with that? Your number 1 tool for data visualization is statistics. And that may not make designers it might not turn you on as a designer, but it does once you start to learn why you would do that. Why is statistics important? Whenever a client contacts us and they're like, oh, we'd like this, you know, probably 80% of the time we get clients who contact us without any data. And they're like, we really like what you do. We want this because it looks cool, you know, like, sure. The problem is what we do, we don't improvise. I can't do infographics. We don't draw pictures. I start with code. I start with those numbers, and I start with finding the anomalies and the connections. The end result is what you see, you know, and what you're seeing from everything I've shown so far, those are the home runs. I mean, those are me up at the batting field, and you see like you know, boom. There are so many strikeouts, and there's so many foul balls. It's frustrating. It's a very frustrating process. I have 2 guys working right now in Berkeley who I'm trying to keep from being mad at me, you know? I mean, because they're working with 2 projects, and they're very big clients, and they're almost done, but there's always these like last-minute changes. And it's very hard to compare data visualization with any other process. There's like software development. Okay. There's the ad agency, like working with an ad agency. I would say the biggest plus takeaway I've taken away that I learned at Planet and working with other ad agencies was working under deadlines and being able to say, I mean, I think ad agencies are the king of deadlines, you know, and journalists, you know, to say, shit, dude, we have like 5 days to do this. Where a standard software engineer who comes out of like Intel would be like, no, we must document and we must get legal approval and everything. Or, you know, the ad people are just going to be like, no, we're going to get this done. I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to smash through this wall. And it's good. I mean, there's a good part of that, but actually data visualization is all of that. We have to document our stuff still. And I mean, these are some of the other tools that we use. But I just kind of randomly did this like on my flight of like, and I'm sure I'm leaving out like a good 30%. I mean, this is a lot of JavaScript libraries. There's a lot of code here. There's only one that's not code based that I can think of, and that's Illustrator. And we use Illustrator for some of our concept work early on, but that's it. Most of the rest of it is all code driven. I hope I'm not like totally turning people off here, but I can see people.
Totally geeky, don't worry.
Okay, cool. The other thing with data visualization, like advice that I always give people, stop trying to tell everything. You know, when War and Peace was written, it's written from one perspective through the entire book. It's a very big book. If you try to rewrite War and Peace from everybody's perspective, not only will you have it a gargantuous, infinite book, but you'll have something that nobody will read because it is information overload. Pick your story. You're a human. Be subjective. Embrace that fact that we're subjective. We have opinions. We have beliefs. We're genetically engineered to have beliefs and whatever in the hell we have, like sexual preferences or whatever. Like that's the way we're born. Embrace that because that is what we are. You know, you need to tell your story and you need to do that fearlessly. That's one thing I love about living in San Francisco is there's no fear. It's just like, this is what I think. You can bash it as much as you want, but I'm going to do it. And nobody's going to be like, okay. Like growing up in Arkansas, it was like, you know, Wes, why are you so different? You know, and I'm like, what do you mean by that? Like, I have no idea what the hell fuck different means, but I've just realized today that means something good. And I feel like that we're doing good things. I'm going to talk about another project. If we have time, I can talk about more. I just don't want to like overwhelm people or bore people or something like that. It seems like people here are still interested, so I'll go into this. And if we want to talk about more, I have other projects, but the McKnight Foundation, they're based in Minneapolis. I love them. They're awesome. So the story with the McKnight Foundation is that they contacted us about 2.5 years ago. They had a 30th year anniversary. And what they do is the McKnight Foundation supports independent artists. And so aesthetic apparatus, quite a few like artists in the region in Wisconsin and Minnesota have applied there. They give them $25,000 grants and basically let them do whatever they want. And they contacted us because they were like, dude, we have a 30th year anniversary. We'd love to have data visualization. And in my mind, I was like, I love what you guys do. Just what kind of data do you have? Like, is there anything that you have that we can work with? And they said, yeah, we have resumes. I was like, okay, well, let's look at that. So we got all these resumes in and we started looking at it. We're like, okay, a couple hundred. This is one, you know, very visual. Don't worry about reading it. You know, this is one very structured, education, employment, honors, and awards. I have not updated my resume in so long, and that just looks so kind of boring, but it's cool. He's a musician, and he's really structured. And then there was these others that was like, dude, 28 pages on your fucking resume? Like, why? You know? Overachiever right here, you know? Like, and I came back to the McKnight Foundation. I was like, wow, like these resumes are all over the place. The thing with data is that you have to be able to group it. You have to be able to simplify it in categories. You have to kind of, it's kind of like in the South, you know, there's a saying in the South that says, maybe it's up here too, I don't know, label jars, not people. You know, where you have a jar, and because my grandma used to jar stuff. I can totally talk Southern, by the way, don't get me drunk. But it's this idea of like, we need jars in data visualization. We need to be able to group where the pickles are and the pears and all that stuff. If we don't have those jars, we just got this like crazy mess going around everywhere. And so I came back to the McKnight Foundation. I said, listen, here's what we need to do. We need to take all your resumes and we need to put them in a database. In order to do that, we have to abstract that data. And the word abstract means to like categorize it, to make those jars that we kind of stuff in. Once we have that in a database, we'll have structured data. Once we have that, we'll have visualizations. Notice this is gray, because I had no idea what the visualizations would look like. And I told that to the McKnight Foundation. I was like, this is what it is. This is going to be 20 to 30% of this project budget, and we're probably going to have to raise that budget. Sorry, but that's what data visualization is. You cannot bullshit your way around data viz, because as soon as you try to, if you try to improvise anything, it's so noticeable, nobody expects it, nobody respects it, and you fail. the coolest part was that they came back to us and they were like, okay, let's do this. And I was like, thank you. It's sort of like the green light was given. And so we built this really ugly sort of entry tool. And we went on Craigslist and found data entry people. One of them was like total drama. Like, oh my God, I have to call my lawyers when I let her go. Like, Jesus, I'm not going to go there. But it was fun. It's the adventure. So we thought this would take us 3 weeks. It took us 2.5 months. Spotted cow. But what we did was we looked at the data, we analyzed it, and we started saying, okay, this is like awards, grants, honors, fellowships, residencies, start date, end date, role, location was a very important thing. I was very ambitious about this. We had all this data in 2.5 months later, and we were like, yes, like now we have all this data and it's structured. Let's start playing with it. And I'm not going to show the entire iterative process, but this was like one of the early visualizations that we did. Without data, you couldn't do this. But basically, I had this idea of like a circle of life, like the start of your professional career, the end, and we started having these bubbles for like the type of activity that you did, like where and the year, and then we started realizing that there's this cluster in the middle, and that's because people would just put year for stuff they did in like 1972 or whatever. It wasn't very accurate, and honestly, it wasn't very pretty. But when you first see this for the first time, it's really hard to be like objective about your own work. Like as a photographer too, it's like you take a picture and you really work hard on it. The way you see it and the way the rest of the world sees it is totally different, and it takes so much experience and time, and people giving you good feedback and constructive feedback to remove yourself from your own creation. Like it's like I have 2 kids and they're the coolest kids in the world, and don't argue with me about that because they're awesome, because they're mine, and that's the way we are sometimes as creatives. I think that's probably a really good analogy. I totally just made that up too. So after a lot of iterations, here's what we did. I mean, this was the visual. Starts at the top, ends at the top. We took the top 6 categories that artist did. So the yellow is exhibition, purple is teaching experience, the orange is award. Here's the deal. We could not show all the information about the artist. There was a privacy concern. This was data art, and I'm not calling it anything else. This was art. This was not business analytics. This was not decision making. This was art. And the same process that we did for this is the exact same process we would do for GE doing their annual reports. That's what I love about data visualization. So what we did was we took this. I can look at this picture right now and say, okay, the first half of the artist's career, they didn't do many exhibits. They did a big exhibit, and then they didn't do much. And then they did some more, and then they started doing more towards the end of the career. But most of the time, they had a job. The last quarter of their professional career, they probably went under some sort of personal change. I don't know. I can read this. There's actually information to that. And if I annotate that, I can try to explain it a little bit more. Is the distance from the center, these are the actual data points. So I can see in 2001, this artist had 3 awards and 2 performances. In this case, performance is blue and the awards is orange. The colors were consistent across everything. This is one more, a little bit more indicative. So this artist, you can see like the first half of their career, they were pretty inactive. Maybe they just made their resume very robust. The second half of their career, they had exhibits all over the place, a lot of exhibitions and whatnot. And what we did was we took every data point in a resume. If you had an exhibit, if you had an interview, if you had a publication, anything, a performance, because some of these artists were performing artists, some of them were painters, some of them were musicians. The coolest thing about this is we just built the rules for the system, and we explained it, and it worked. And then once we plugged in the data, every artist had their own sort of constellation, their own sort of picture of how their work looked. This was a very industrious artist because he did a lot of different things at the same time. And we animated this too because they wanted all of this online, obviously, to show these artists. And just to watch these build out was fascinating for us. It was so much fun to work on this. And for me, the beauty of this project and one of my biggest goals is individually it looks really interesting. But then when you put it on a grid and you use small multiples, it also looks interesting. They're all different. There's nothing the same. because these are human lives that we're actually depicting here. And this is art. This is like art made of artists, based on artists' professional careers. And one of the coolest parts of this project was that the McKnight Foundation was like, all right, we've got 6 featured artists. We want to print this out like big ass format, and we want to give them markers so they can go and annotate their own work, which like put tears to my eyes. This was a musician, and he like wrote all over his work. It was crazy. He fucking wrote a song on his piece. Like what the hell, dude? Like, whatever. And they would bring like pictures and notes, like holy crap. And this was like accurate, like they read it, they got it, and it was like that part is fascinating for me. Like when you see this happen and you see this actually coming out of artists. It's not just about corporations. Yes, we work for Facebook and Google and whatnot. It's also about what do you do for us? We're humans, and how do you show us as in our humanity? Because one of my biggest theories is like, and it's something I'm constantly arguing with people, is when we look at our history, we try to understand our own society by like 3 or 4 different factors: by military achievements, by scientific achievements, and by art. And I'm hoping that the future will look back at this time and not look at LOL cats. Like I'm fighting LOL cats all the time, because I want to help define some of the art of our world today. And that we started looking more at an engineering overlap of art today and how that performs. So we took geolocation of that data, and I mentioned that in that really ugly slide earlier, and that was really important for me. I wanted to try to show like a global scope of an artist's career. It doesn't mean where was the artist in their life. It really is just what is the scope of the artist's work throughout their life based on their resumes. And so the same thing, we started mapping out all of these locations. These are performances like everywhere around the world, and it's the exact same thing. Like the same thing with the stars is that when you plot it around the Earth, they're all unique. They're the same thing. And then when you zoom into one, you can actually see an individual one build out. And to see that, you just have to kind of see it in motion. And let me just make sure. Yeah. So you have to sort of see one artist by itself to really enjoy that. Last year with the McKnight Foundation, I really wanted to print those out with like a 3D printer and have like a coffee holder or something like that. They didn't like it as much, but that's it. That's all I have.